pass them out to you so you can know what we're talking about tonight. Welcome back. Glad you made it back safe and sound, Christian. Glad it didn't leave you there. Everybody okay? I know what it is. The sun's shining outside, and you're like, get me out of here. Let me go outside. It's nice to have our college boys back home for a couple days. Talking about you. Yeah. So chapters 17 and 18 kind of transport us back to the beginning of tribulation and gives us an overview of a lot of different things. So when we get into it, just know it's we're going backwards to move forwards, okay? Have you ever, I know you've watched Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka, the original version. Remember that one? You got to walk backwards to go forwards. Anyway, go back and watch it. It's there. So let's read chapter 17, the first 6 verses, and then we'll get into explaining what all this kind of means. Then one of these 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." Sounds like a fantastic viewing party, right? So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, and when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. Sounds like a fantastic little picture here that he is looking at. And so we're seeing, when we talk about the harlot, and when we talk about this power and them sitting on these kingdoms, it's talking about the power, the spirit of the Antichrist, all of the things that are happening all at once at the beginning of this period of the tribulation, and we're going to travel through, so we're going to see it unpacking as we go. So in our notes, here's what we have. We've got chapter 17 gives us the spiritual destruction. It's going to outline the spiritual destruction of what's happening on the earth. And then chapter 18 gives us the political destruction that takes place. And there's 2 views. First is the judgment of the great harlot. The second view that we'll get into is the bride of the Lamb, the church. And there's 7 differences between the 2. If you look at these really quick, they actually match up very well. When we go through 17 and then 19 and 20 and 21 and 22, they'll make better sense later. But here's how the harlot, where the description of that compared to the description of the bride. In the wilderness as opposed to being in heaven. Big difference. Rides on the beast, returns with Christ. Adorned in luxury, adorned in righteousness. Cup of abomination, the water of life. Great city, holy city. War against the Lamb, reigned with the Lamb. Ends in destruction, lives forever. Humongous dichotomy between the 2. And what we're going to read about tonight is the harlot and what she represents. So the woman in verses 1 and 2. We see that one of the 7 angels, which is one of the previous 7 angels that came and poured out the bowls. So this is kind of transporting us back to see that the bowls have not been poured out yet, that this angel is talking with John, allowing him to see that this is what is getting ready to happen on the harlot. This is a symbol of Babylon, which Babylon was just a great prostitute, somebody to draw someone away from their loved one. Babylon, in this instance, drew people away from the love of God. And so that is why it is the harlot. It's a false religion, which a false religion is always the true enemy of true religion. And it's utterly evil. It is spiritual adultery. That is what we are talking about, the harlot. It's not specifically a person, a woman. It is the idea of being swept away and going after anything other than God. which if you live in our world at all and can see with your two eyes, you can see very clearly that we live in a spirit of adultery. It is all around us. Everything is pulling at us to pull us away from God, and that is what is happening here. So there are those who are outwardly religious, seeming to join with Christ, but internally they are not. And you know people very well that say, oh, I'm a Christian, but absolutely do not resemble that at all. When it talks about seated on many waters in verses 1 and 2, it's talking about waters being the people, multitudes, nations, and tongues. It's not talking about physical water. Remember, we talked about that a couple of chapters back. It's actually referring to people. And so when we see about this harlotry, the woman, the spirit of adultery, sitting on the people, it means that this is what the people are going after. This is what they're doing. So many nations are ruled by Babylon, and we'll talk about that later. But they are drunk on her wine. Doesn't mean they're a bunch of drunkards. It simply means the way that she promotes life should be lived in the world that we exist in, people are just infatuated with it. They're drunk with it. They are just out of control. They're not under their own control. And it is the ultimate form of spiritual drunkenness, materialism and commercialism. And it's also an alliance with the apostate church. Remember, when we go back to those 7 churches, one of the churches is going to be the main apostate church. It's just going to walk away from God. They knew God, but they are walking away, going in a different direction. And that is what this is talking about as well. And they're going to join with the political powers of the world. Walvoord, which is just one of the guys that I studied, he makes this suggestion. He says, the hardest to win to Christ and the most difficult to instruct in spiritual truth are those who have previously embraced false religion with its outward show of a worship of God. In other words, they think they're saved, they think they've got all the right answers, but they are absolutely missing the boat, and it is very difficult to come alongside of somebody and convince them otherwise. Does that make sense? So that is what we are experiencing when we talk about the woman, this spirit of harlotry or prostitution or the spiritual adultery. These are people who know truth but have turned their back away from God and focusing on the Antichrist, the beast, Satan, all of these other things that appeal to who they are. Verses 3 and 4, here's the first vision. The beast that is seen is the same beast as in chapter 13. Again, most likely some type of political power that is happening here, but is going to be a person. And this spirit of harlotry, this woman, this spiritual adultery is going to be resting on this beast. In other words, he's going to come in and draw people away from their view of Christ, of God. So his spiritual power is going to actually be more than the political power that is there. This woman is supported by and dominates the political power. So this beast that is supporting the spiritual adultery is going to be driven by the spiritual adultery as well as supported by the spiritual adultery at the beginning of the tribulation. Again, the 7 heads are those 7 successive forms of government. A lot of people like to play that it could have been the Roman government, how they kind of played out in their main rulers. Some people would take the current rulers that we have today. But then you get into the idea that during the tribulation, there are going to be 10 major power players that are going to rule all at the same time. And that spiritual adulteress, the spirit of adultery is going to rest on them because, again, they're going to pull people away from Christ. When it talks about full of blasphemous names, it's just that it's going to have every name that you can think of that's going to point people away from God. Anything and everything. And so the apostate church, this is the church that claims to be after God but are going after other things and allowing other things in. They're going to be tightly bound with this beast. They're going to be well adorned. They're going to look really good. Again, without picking on one religion or the other, but there is one major religion out there that claims to be Christian in nature but is very, very heavily adorned in a lot of gold and flashy things. Be careful of that. Just throwing that out there. But it's going to be gold, scarlet, purple, pearls, anything that's going to connect them with being rich, and it's going to make them look like, because they have all of this opulence, that they are really rich in spiritual values, but they are going to be not. They're just going to have a pomp and circumstance of Christendom, meant to glorify and magnify this woman through their religious garb, But the cup that they carry, unlike the cup that Christ carried, is going to be filled with spiritual immorality, which, if you don't know what immorality is, it's just sin. And that's as simple as I can make it, just sin. The problem is, it's not just about sin. It goes on to describe fornication, which that's a really churchy word for sexual sin. Anything outside of the bonds of marriage, the way that God intended it. So we can play the games of, well, it's not that bad. It's God can be okay with it. The reality is, God designed sex to happen a certain way, and anything outside of that design is fornication. Could be talking about spiritual fornication here, meaning I'm messing around with other gods. Most likely it's talking about the physical fornication that's happening inside the church that is absolutely outside of the bonds of what God wanted us to experience. Increase of the world's showiness. In other words, this church, this apostate church, this spiritual adultery is just growing, and it decreases in the spiritual truths and purity. Everybody okay so far? I'll pause here in a second. Verse 5, we've got Babylon. This is the name for a great system of religious error. If we go back and look at Babylon all the way through Scripture, it is never meant good. It's always referring to something against God, bad, terrible, awful, sinful, the worst. It's always a pagan religion, false form of Christianity, and it's just simply opposed to God. So when we see anything along that lines in these passages, that's what it's referring to, the spiritual wickedness of the earth. Again, it's carried throughout Scripture. If you go back to Genesis 10, you'll find the Tower of Babel. That's kind of where we get Babylon from. And now you're seeing it in Revelation. So from Genesis to Revelation, it's there and it's not good. I included this because it's just interesting to think about. But the wife of Nimrod, that is a real dude. If you ever get called a Nimrod, it's not a pleasant name. It's not meant to be nice. But the wife of Nimrod founded the city of Babylon, but it was founded for a secret religious rite as a part of idol worship. So this city was not founded for biblical reasons or for godly reasons. It was founded to create another atmosphere to worship these other gods. She was the high priestess of idol worship. So she's the top of the line for worshiping all of these other idols. And she gives birth to a son, and she claims that it was miraculous. His name was Tammuz, and it was a false Messiah. So she knows somehow or another that this Messiah is coming, and yet she makes it as if this guy is the Messiah. And it's actually alluded to in Scripture in those passages. You can go check those out later. But this is a type of idol worship that's characterized as a counterfeit religion and represented by Babylon. It's permeated into the Christian church, and it's still present if we're not careful. Meaning, churches can be known for their worship. Churches can be known for their programs. And if we are worshiping our worship or worshiping our programs, then we could easily be encapsulated in the idea of spiritual adultery, because it's becoming more about all of the other stuff rather than what it really is about. Churches can become about their preachers or about the sermons. It's not about that. It is about the God that is preached about and the Spirit that lives within inside the church that is moving and grooving. So we need to pay attention to that and be very careful. And then it talks about how it is a great mystery. It encourages us to look deeper at than just what we can see, and it is more figurative rather than literal, that it's a mystery, because we can look in there and see. So there's 10 characteristics of Babylon all through this passage, and I think it's chapter 18 as well. Yep. Here are 10 characteristics. Rich and prosperous, immoral and drunken, associated with Satan and the beast. It's a city that sits on 7 mountains. Now that can kind of come into play, especially when we're talking about what's left of the earth, because remember, most of the earth has been destroyed, and we're kind of over in the Middle East. When you look back onto Rome, which is exactly what John was doing from the island of Patmos, there's 7 mountains that he's looking at. And so he's potentially pointing us to the idea that it is a Roman government that's coming back that will be a huge part of the power play, which what exists in Rome that's highly political as well as spiritual. The Catholic Church could be what he's referring to. Again, Not picking on any one religion, just stating what is potentially factual. It's also a leader of the 10-nation confederacy with Roman roots. It's a city that reigns over many nations. It's center for commercial enterprises. Sailors cross sea to get there. It's an entertainment capital, and it burns up in 1 hour. So all the other things sound really good except for that last one, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So any questions on the first 5 verses? Any thoughts? That was a lot. Have an answer. Maybe they'll match. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yes, so the woman that gave birth actually does not happen in 17. That was giving us background and story of Babel from the lady, the wife of Nimrod. Yeah, that was more of an ancillary note to help us understand where Babel comes from. Two different things. Take me back where you are. Yes, this is not a woman. Okay. No, don't give up. Ask. Where's the other that you're alluding to? Take me back. Mm-hmm. Yes, 2 different ones. Yes. For sure, 100%. And that's a great point because later on in our notes, that's actually what we talk about a lot is that what we're seeing in 17 and 18, that this spirit of Antichrist, the woman is doing, it's a cheap version of what God has done. Yes. So that's what you were trying to say. Gotcha. Thank you. Sorry. I didn't put that together quick enough. My bad. Any other thoughts? All right. Let's read verse 7 and then we'll explain it. But the angel said to me, "Why did you marvel? I tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns." So in 6 and 7, we have the woman, which is the source of all evil in apostate Christendom. Again, this is not a person as much as it is a spirit of just don't want to be about God. And it's, again, what a statement of drunk on all the blood of the martyrs. They start in the bottomless pit but ends in destruction. And it is the final political party that's under Satan's control. So again, this is a picture of what's happening at the end. And it's honestly beyond what we can even fathom to some degree. So let's keep going. We'll finish the chapter. Verse 8, "The beast that you saw was and is not and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is." Actually, let's pause there because that's super confusing. So when we talk about the 3 areas, who was, who is not, and who is. Who was, many people would argue that it is talking about the government that was, meaning Julius Caesar, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero, those Roman leaders that were just horrendously bad. And so they were a spirit of Antichrist or a spirit of spiritual adultery. They wanted nothing to do with God. They wanted all the power to themselves. When it talks about who is not, it gets a little weird because, okay, does that mean that they're not? No. What it means is it's not just a man. It's more than the man that's powerful here. So it's not saying that they weren't a man. It's saying that it's not just about the person that's leading, that the woman. It's about something bigger. Does that make sense? Because a lot of times what we want to do is, who is it? What is it? No. It's bigger than that. It's more than just specifically one person. It's not about that person. It's about the bigger picture. A lot of times we want to say, well, why is God doing this? Or why is God not doing that? No. It's not about that. It's about what's the bigger picture about what he's trying to accomplish. So it's taking a step back and get a broader view of what is happening here. And so we're looking at the power that this person has, that this spirit has, that it's human and satanic. They're able to do all kinds of things. And then who is to come? It is absolutely Satan that will be coming. So all of these are tightly knitted together through the spirit of the Antichrist, which is already here. What I mean by that is, I don't know if the Antichrist is here. What I do know is that the spirit of the Antichrist is already present. You can look in our own little nation and see that the spirit of Antichrist is clearly present. Others believe that the final ruler is simply the political power as the one world government, which makes sense, but I believe it's going to be even more than that. But it does talk about in that verse that those who are not written in the book of life are completely blown away, but still not enough for them to change their hearts, which again astounds me. Any questions on 6, 7, and 8? Yes. Why he marveled at it? No, I didn't. Couldn't tell you, I wasn't there. I don't know. I think it's just the sight of seeing all of this starting to play out. I mean, he's kind of, in my mind, the way that I see it, he's hovering over the interaction of this 7 years, and he's seeing it all kind of play out. And so he's probably just blown away, astounded by, wow, look at this. This is crazy. It could be that he's putting together what he has already seen in his own lifetime and putting pieces of the puzzle together of, wow, if this is what it looks like now, what is it going to look like even later? Yep. The book of life, that's a great question. Many people would argue that the book of life is where the names are written down of those that have given their hearts and life to Christ, that are securely written in there. Some would argue that every name of every person that's ever been born is written in there, and when they die, if they have not accepted Christ, their name gets taken out. Sure. I have no idea. That would be my guess. I mean, it says it's a book of life, the Lamb's book of life, that where their names are written down. So I would think it would be that. It's going to be a big book. Yep. Well, there's two different things happening here. You've got John who's seeing the whole thing play out, and then you've got people who are there that are just kind of taking it all in as the tribulation works through and what they're experiencing. I'm not sure. They're marveling at two different things? No, I think they're just marveling because it's just amazing to them. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay, let's keep rolling. We got a lot to do. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. When he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th and is of the 7 and is going to perdition. Anybody lost yet? The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as of yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as king with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make a war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. The 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So let's unpack this wonderful little spot. So spiritual wisdom is required to understand the following. That's what he talks about here. 7 mountains forms the nucleus of the ancient city of Rome, more like the hills than mountains. It's not like mountains like in North Carolina, just hills. But it helps give an understanding to the potential position of the ecclesiastical pomp and circumstance, some would say Catholicism. That's a lot of big words just to simply say, it gives us a nice landscape, gives us an understanding of where most of this is going to take place, and it's most likely going to be surrounded and rooted in Catholicism. The 7 kings, previously stated in the explanation of verse above, some suggest possible previous government powerhouses such as Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece, which they all fell. That would be the past. The current, for him, would be Rome, and the future kingdom is the future kingdom. We don't know what it's going to be. So those are most likely what it's talking about, who was, who is, and who is to come. And the 8th will be Satan, the devil. And he will be thrown, he's the only one that's going to be thrown into perdition with all of his little followers. Verses 12 through 14 talks about the 10 horns and explains those. Again, there's going to be a world empire. They're all going to have simultaneous power, the 10 kingdoms that are left. Again, not a lot of world that's left to kind of rule, so these guys are there. They're going to only have this power for an hour. Not that it's going to be taken away from them, but they're actually going to return it back to the beast, which, again, is all over the place, but it's the Antichrist, the false prophet, Satan's control, all of those things that are happening here. It's going to be a fictional and counterfeit version of God's plan. For us, we have the power of our lives until we submit it to God, and that is what they are going to do. They're going to have this power and control over their kingdoms until they return it back to the enemy. They will choose to war against the Lamb. Ultimately, they will lose. So again, big picture of the 7-year of what is happening. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. That's a great question. We're not sure whether it's going to be 60 literal minutes or just a short time period. And so we'll kind of have to wait and see on that one. I would tend to think, it doesn't make sense that, okay, you have a power for an hour and then they're like, no. It makes better sense. It's more plausible that it's a little bit of a period of time. But so far, most of the timing that we've had through here have been pretty accurate. So many would argue that it's actually just probably going to be an hour. Any other question? Yeah.
So the 7 kings and the 10 horns. So is the 7 kings kingdoms, and then the 10 horns is more individual people?
That's what would be argued. The 7 horns could be most likely past kingdoms, kingdom to come. That's what some would argue and believe. The 10 kingdoms are going to be, so you guys missed a large part of what we've talked about, but well over a third of the world is gone. It's just destroyed. And so the basic area of what we've got left is over on the Western culture. And so the 10 kingdoms are probably going to be the 10 powerhouses that are left. May only be the 10 rulers that are left, but they're going to combine under the rule of the Antichrist, who has swayed the church, which most likely could be argued that is the Catholic Church. So yes, most likely 10 rulers. Yep. Any other questions? Be okay? We are not going to finish tonight. Yikes. When we talk about water in verse 15, water usually refers to water, but not in this case, as 15 tells us that it is the people, multitudes, nations, and tongues, which basically means everybody that's left that's not following God. That's who is going to be this woman is going to be resting upon. The 10 horns and the beast, the 10 powers and the beast combine to overthrow the woman. Again, the woman in this case is the spiritual adultery, this church that has drawn people away from God. They think that the Antichrist, the beast, is coming in cahoots with them. The 10-power confederation, they're going to gain their power. They're going to give it back to the beast, and they're going to overcome the church. They're just going to wipe them out. The church will no longer exist as far as the church that is the apostate church. We're not there, so we should be fine. The false religion who thought they were being protected and taken care of is who we're talking about, this apostate church. They compromise truth in hopes to connect and do things better, and here's the cost in the long run. They are stripped of their power and authority, their flesh is eaten, and they're burned by fire. I'm not sure what all that means. It could be that they are martyred, they're killed. It really could mean that their flesh is burnt up, that all that they have is burnt up. All we know is that this 10-power confederation and the beast, the Antichrist, kill the apostate church and this spiritual adultery. They're just done with it all. They don't want any of it. And who initiated all this? God does, which I find comical. This happens midway through the tribulation period. So again, we're only halfway through when this takes place. The first half is that false religion that's growing and safe. Second half is it's taken away. All religion and political power is taken away, never to return. This beast is self-proclaimed dictator of the world. Church is no longer needed. It's basically when the world has given themselves over to their own desires, there's no longer a need for religion. So again, this would lend the argument for a mid-tribulation rapture. Not a pre or a post, but a mid. People could argue that what's left of the church, whether apostate or not, it is finally just obliterated, and that is when it is taken up and no longer existing. So, that's chapter 17. So again, real quick, the idea is, in the tribulation, whether the church is here or not, there will be spiritual adultery taking place. That is the woman. This woman is the church that is walking away from God or committing spiritual adultery. God allows them to be just completely obliterated because of this by using the beast, the 10-power confederation that turned their power over to the beast, and he brings judgment onto whatever is left of the church. So that's where we're at in that first 3.5 period. Now we're going to look at the next 3.5. Everybody good? Everybody as confused as I was? Great. Chapter 18, first 8 verses. Here we go. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every soul or foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. So real quick, this angel is basically saying, hey, I see everybody that's left and everybody has sold their soul to this woman, this spiritual adultery. And I heard another loud voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins and lest you receive of her plagues. Again, verse 4 is a post or a mid-tribulation rapture. Does everybody see that? This voice is saying, Come out of her, my children, my people. So that, again, is an argument for a mid-tribulation rapture, which doesn't excite me, but it could be. For her sins have reached, in verse 5, to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mix double for her. In the measure that she has glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as queen and am no widow and will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine. And she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her. He's not happy, by the way, in case you didn't see that. Verse 1, same angel as in chapter 17, meaning it may not be the same exact angel, but it's after the same kind, meaning it's the same type of angel that's coming. Verse 2, God sees, reveals, and announces it as fallen. He sends an angel to say, here's what's happened. Babylon has finally fallen, and it is a desolate wilderness. And what a description. It's a dwelling place for demons. It's a prison for every foul spirit. And it's a cage for every unclean and hated bird. Now you got to remember, the poor 144,000 that are set apart are there. And maybe that's who he's talking about. Hey, it's time for you to come home as well. Meaning when they are saved, they're protected. So maybe it's not a call for the church to come. Maybe he's only talking about those that are left. Again, we're not sure who he's really talking about. But what matters most is this is not a place you want to be. This is not the place that you want to say, oh, well, maybe I'm saved, maybe I'm not saved. This is something you want to decide now to make sure to where you're not there in this awful, desolate, horrible place. And I would also say that you can get to that place, figuratively speaking, in your spiritual walk even now, to where it feels very desolate, very dry, very much like you're wandering, very much like you're not sure what's going on and where is God. When you're in that spot, I highly encourage you, find some water quick. And the only water that you need to find is the water that Christ gives. It's my little shameless plug there. Verse 3, major and truthful accusation. He says, you are intoxicated with materialism and greed. Fornication is everywhere, which is nothing more than desire outside the realm of God. They're cheaters. They fell in love with the things outside of God's love and plan. To me, that is the accusation that God levels through this angel. And that's huge. Listen, that should not be said of any believer in today's time. Just should not. If any part of that is a part of your life, it is time to make it right today. Like, that is a big deal. Verse 4, another voice. This is different voice. Separate from the new world, or separate from the new world system, create distance, disassociate, don't participate. Those are strong statements of what's being said in here. Be called out from that. Remember a couple of chapters ago where after the beast separates himself from the Jewish people and kind of turns coat, the Jewish people run away, remember? Maybe that's what it's talking about. Separate. I'm calling you to get out of Dodge, go away from this. Do not associate with this type of lifestyle. And sometimes people wonder, well, what does Revelation have to do with us? We're not going to be here. That verse right there tells you what Revelation has to do with you. He is talking strongly against this spiritual adultery, spiritual fornication of going after all of these things that are against God. And what does he say? He says, separate. Do not associate. And if you want to take something practical out of Revelation that is dealing with the future of what is to come, that is what you can take tonight that is practical. Do not associate. Separate. Get away from all that is wrong and against God. I can't make it any clearer and I can't be any stronger with that. Does everybody hear what I'm saying? Thank you. Like that, I seriously could spend the rest of the night talking about that. But if you don't hear anything else that we've talked about through Revelation, hear that. That is God's heart for each and every one of us, to separate and not associate with that which is against God. Period. Is that pretty clear? When we do that, we won't experience the bowls, plagues, and judgments, which I'm down for. I don't want to experience any of that. Verse 5, it talks about them being stacked up and welded together is the picture that the sins have reached heaven. He's saying there is so much fornication and spiritual adultery taking place that it is reaching heaven because you just stack them up and weld them together and they will reach me. It's much like the Tower of Babel that was struck down and confused. He's going to interrupt their unity through greed and pride. Remember, they have this confederation, one world confederation, but they turn on each other and they turn on the beast and they lose their mind. They don't know what they're doing and they just turn against God. They love the wealth way too much and they're so prideful in 6 and 7. They deal with her just as she dealt with the people, but they double everything. So in other words, this angel is saying, okay, this spiritual adultery, this woman, this thing that's driving people away from God, however they have dealt with the people of God, double that onto them. So torment her where she felt safe, which was stuff and financial stuff. So we're going to double the torment there. They caused the non-markers, those that have maybe the mark of Christ or did not take the mark of the beast, to unable to buy food. So they're going to double the punishment and cause a massive famine. They willfully lived in rebellion. They took time to build this wonderful thing, and God's going to destroy it. And he's going to destroy it in an hour. Just like Daniel prophesied that Babylon would be destroyed, they were destroyed. They fell the next day. Just in the New Testament, this rich man that built all these barns to house his riches, he lost them. He lost it all. And God will bring the judgment. All the kings loved her, but they turned their back. Again, this is the apostate church, and they destroyed all of her spirituality. Any influence that she had on the remainder of the world is now absolutely gone. And God destroys what they loved most, and he does it in 1 hour. Now again, 60 minutes, not sure. The point is, it's gone. What they took a lifetime to build up, God does it in a flash. Again, lesson for us. We can build our little monuments and build our little plans, and God has the power to destroy it immediately. What he wants from us is full submission for him to be able to build what he wants to build in us. Any questions on the first 8 verses? Can you see the fallacy of trying to follow our own way? God will have the last say. He will have the last call. Let's finish out this. Oh gosh, man. We'll try to finish it. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning. So the very ones that turn their back on her will be sad when she's gone. Because that makes sense, right? Standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her. For no one buys their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple silk and scarlet. Every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, incense, fragrant oil, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. This is what they're selling. This is all they have left. Remember, the world is not the world that we have now, okay? So they don't have all the cool stuff. This is all they have left to produce and to sell, and now they have no way of unloading all this stuff, partly because the world is in shambles, partly because there's nobody left to buy this stuff. The financial ruin that has taken place, and now these men have no way to make a living. It's a very, very dire situation. Again, you got to remember, this is the latter half of the tribulation. Remember all those, the trumpets that blew and the bowls that are being poured out? This is what's happening to the people. That's what John is now seeing, the overall picture of all these things that are happening. He says in verse 14, the fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. When it talks about the fruit here, it's talking about the things that made you happy. The things that brought your soul joy no longer exist. They're gone. The merchants of these things who became rich by her will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing and saying, alas, alas, that great city was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ships, and sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing and saying, alas, alas, that great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. When I read that, these men, these shipmasters, are not allowed to dock because of the smoke of the fact that the city is turned to dust. What does that sound like to you? What kind of warfare? Sounds like a massive nuclear warfare has dropped. And it is so uninhabitable, they can't dock and regain what they have spent or make a living. Huge problem. Verses 9 and 10, there's mourning for the fall of the commercial side of things, the stuff they loved most, the wrong spiritual guidance and the commercialism. Remember, the woman, this Babylon, this spiritual adultery, this spirit of going against God has been very profitable for them, and now it's no longer there, and so they're sad about that. God simply destroys it as if it was nothing. Again, this is the second time that 1 hour is mentioned. There's a merchant's loss of income. They stand afar, they don't want to go and can't go in the land, seemingly staying on their boats. They have no way to sell their stuff. It's an exhaustive list of super amazing items. But listen to this, it's the bodies and souls of men. Slavery and spirituality is what's happened here. They can't recoup any of this. I'm not talking about slavery that way that we know it. I'm talking about slavery to the spiritual fornication, slavery to the commercialism, slavery to greed, slavery to stuff. It is just breaking them. And they are sad because they have no way to scratch that itch. That's why I go back to verse 14. The fruit that their soul longed for has gone. Those things that they were enslaved to is no longer there. So they lamented over all of that. They were more sad of the material loss than the spiritual loss. Again, why would they not go on land? It just makes sense for the argument of some type of nuclear bomb. Not saying it is, not saying it's not, but I lean heavily towards the idea that when those bowls pour out, it sounds more like a warfare tactic that it's just uninhabitable land. And we know what a nuclear bomb will do. It's devoid of human life, burned up with fire, destroyed in 1 hour. People afraid to enter the borders, wealthy laid to rest, violently overthrown, devoid of all activity. That is what a nuclear warfare sounds like to me. Just awful. Again, 17 and 19. 1 hour is mentioned. So again, that kind of takes us to the idea, Evie, that it probably means 1 hour. Like just to reiterate by God the fact that you can take hundreds of thousands of years and build this up. I can take care of it just like that. It's gone. So I think for me, it really means 60 minutes. So could it be that she, the spirit of Babylon, had spent so much time and energy along with the world leaders at this time to build their fortune that God simply says, it means so very little, I'll just destroy it quickly. There's a second command given in verse 20. First was to come out and separate. This time it's to rejoice. They rejoice in heaven for retribution and vengeance that has finally been dealt. Remember, if we went back chapters, the voices and the spirits underneath the throne that were crying out, when, God, when are you going to take care of this? When are you going to show vengeance for us? Remember that? That's what's being rejoiced now. Finally, these jokers that have mistreated us and martyred us for our faith, they're getting theirs. Can I finish? You guys good? Hope so, because I'm going to finish. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, threw it into the sea, saying, thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you anymore. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you anymore. And the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you anymore. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you anymore. The voice of the bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you anymore. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and of all who were slain on the earth. Again, the spirit of Babylon, the spirit of spiritual adultery, is no longer existent. God will destroy Babylon. It's the city itself and the system that it represents. When we talk about the millstone, it's a swift, sudden, violent, and total destruction. You can go back to Jeremiah 51 to see that. Jesus talks about that, where he says it's better that you put a millstone around your neck and go jump in a lake than to offend one of these little ones. That was just something that will become nothing. This major city, this major exploitation of rule and power is brought to nothing. And merchants weren't just selling goods, they were pushing the Babylonian system. They were huge proponents of just greed and materialism and please yourself. But they used sorcery to convince, and they hated any remaining followers of God. 3 quick things: historical and future Babylon. Politically, it symbolizes prideful rebellion against God. Religiously, it represents idolatrous religion and worship. And economically, it's covetousness, pride of wealth, and sensuality. That is what Babylon was, and that is where we are headed if we're not already there. Thoughts or questions? I know it's so much. I promise the last day will be much better when we can kind of outline this in a little bit better way so you can kind of see clearly what's going to take place. Conceivably, yes. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure where those ships were when all this takes place, because if it's the massive meteor that hits the ocean, or if it's a volcano that comes up, just destroys the ecosystem of the ocean, we're not sure what it's going to be. Where the ship's at? Were they on the other side of the world? Did this happen on one side of the world? So to answer that question is a impossible answer, but it's a very fair question and a good question, because it could be that the ships were completely protected, or they just knew how to build them back really quickly. Then maybe they go back, and maybe it's just in the Mediterranean Sea, and they go back just to really small boats that they had back and forth. We're not quite sure what that looks like, but that's a really good question, because it would make sense that if the seas are destroyed or there's massive upheaval in the sea, that it would destroy the ships as well. Good question. No? That's it? Let me pray for you. God, you're good. It's a lot, I know, but you know how to take tidbits and dive them deep in our hearts. You know how to speak to us directly, how we learn best. And I'm thankful for your word, that you can help make sense of it all for us, God. And I pray that as we finish out the next few weeks of studying Revelation, I pray that you would help us to be able to land in good places, to understand it the best that we can. And so thanks for this time that you've afforded us. But I do ask that your hand rest on these that are listening to all of this and trying to process it through, and just walk with them and bring them to a good landing spot. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for coming. And it's Mr. Tim who drove all the way back just to see you guys tonight.
A couple quick announcements. First of all,
Miss Bonnie.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, yeah.
Da,
Get the new
da.
songs?
The youth group is awesome.
You got the new song? Yeah.
You're looking like, who's talking? Are you talking to me? Woo-hoo. 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 Okay.
Hesitate to even play something because I know it's sad.
On, everything's on.
I don't want to be read as antisocial. Right. Yeah. It's weird now. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Like something if someone doesn't have an Apple and they got the other was all Android, then you can't get out of it or something.
No, yeah, right? Come a long way.
Yeah, you know. Why are there always in the back?
No, don't get no vaccine.
Lift the name of Jesus high. Lift the name of Jesus high. Lift the name of Jesus high. My little thing came out. There we go. Oh, come on.